Lesson 7. Framing the dynamic problem of your system. In this lesson, we'll start by recognizing that complex systems are often faced with what we call wicked problems. We would define what these wicked problems are and how we would approach them. We will also discuss the concept of systems practice. Systems practice begins by introducing a way by which we can now apply the concepts from what we have learned in systems thinking. And then the last part will be to introduce the idea of building what we call a shared model. A shared model is a way by which we can get agreements from different members of the team and possibly external shareholders that can have various views in our system. Before we begin to apply what we've learned in systems thinking, we need to identify and recognize what we call wicked problems in your system. A common situation that happens in most of the systems we are facing is that these systems exist in what we call a complex and ambiguous environment. By recognizing that systems exist in this environment, it creates a situation where we're now faced with what we call wicked problems. Wicked problems are the kind of problems that are often plaguing many social systems and even in business systems. These problems are what we call ill-formulated, which means it's confusing. It's actually also made up of conflicting issues that are difficult to isolate, and that it impacts the whole system and creates what we call a confusion on who are the culprit of all of these problems. One thing to keep in mind is that when we are dealing with wicked problems, we are not really solving them, but in essence, trying to tame the wicked problems. It's like facing an angry, growling lion, where you cannot simply keep the lion from growling, but you can help tame the lion so that it can be influenced to stop growling. Wicked problems are oftentimes solutions in the past that turn out to be worse than what it was intended. We often try to address problems by splitting them up, carving off something and fix this and at the same time forgetting about the other parts of the system, because what we felt is that somebody else will handle that difficult problem. And therefore, because of this kind of thinking, we tend to believe that when we solve a problem, it's easier to solve it by pieces than by treating it as a whole. A popular management consultant, Eddie Obeng, has identified when we can use what we call systems thinking with these wicked problems. These wicked problems are oftentimes at the realm of situations or issues where we poorly understood how things are and what the goals are. For other problems that are well understood and you know what to do, those are what he called paint by numbers. These are the type of problems that you can probably use your problem solving techniques, root cause analysis, or even some of those advanced techniques like Six Sigma. But when you're dealing with wicked problems, systems thinking becomes a very powerful tool in the way we will understand the nature of the problem and what it is really trying to accomplish. In this lesson, we will now use what we have learned in systems thinking, its principles and its concepts and its tools, on how we can now apply it, and we now call it systems practice. And systems practice is simply in a methodology or an approach by which we will now try to understand and deal with wicked problems. systems practice can be broken down into two major phases. The first phase is where we try to clarify the system that you're studying, and the second part is where you now prepare how you might want to intervene and attempt to help the system be healthier. In clarifying the system, we need to be able to focus on the underlying notion of what the problem is and be able to test some sort of an hypothesis as to what could be causing or influencing the problem. At the second part is where we now try to do some testing and be able to see whether the ideas we have on the interventions are truly going to work and what people think about it. Systems practice is about using what you have learned in systems thinking, the principles and the tools, to try to push beyond the kind of problems that you think you know or the kind of problems you think you see. You need to go beyond that simple problem and see underlying patterns and ask the question of whether these things that I know are really true or not. We need to see the leverage that we can use to change the behavior of the system, and that by going through the process of understanding the system, we get to learn to know how we should adapt in order to influence the changes that the system needed. This concept of systems practice is actually developed by the Omidyar Group, and the goal is not to just make the system different or change or innovate, but rather how you can go with the system so that you can work with its complexity in order to make the system healthier. Systems practice is actually a process of systems thinking where you try to gain clarity, find leverage, how you can act strategically, and then learn along the way how those interventions can truly work for the system. When we now apply systems practice in our work or day-to-day task, we now look at answering three major questions when we are faced with wicked problems in our system. How does the current environment within which you work operate as a complex and dynamic system? What drives the current system? What inspires it? What are the goals? What are its aspirations? What are the factors that influence how we act towards these goals? Second, how will your strategy engage the system in order to have a highly leveraged impact? This means that we need to find ways to be able to influence the changes rather than applying brute force change on the system. And finally, when we identify these possible changes or leverages we can use, how might we test them in the real world? How do you now influence and make it work or make it happen so that the system will be able to learn and adapt to the changes you wanted to happen? In the first phase of our systems practice, our goal is to clarify your system. In order to clarify the system, we need to have a better understanding of what's driving it. First thing you need to talk about is identify what is the guiding star of your system. What's the aspiration? Second, we need to define what we call a near star, a goal that's nearer that allows you to have a closer way to grasp an outcome without necessarily waiting too long or too far ahead before you reach your guiding star. And third, we need to also visualize the behavior that you're trying to address or manage when you are going to now introduce interventions later on. All of these three steps will help us, lead us to understand the system better. And by understanding system better, we need to be able to frame it, put a way by which we can ask ourselves, what is exactly the system all about? When clarifying your system, we need to know what would be the guiding star. A guiding star is similar to a vision of the organization where you frame it so that we understand what will motivate the system. We also need to define the guiding star so the team that you have in this endeavor will also understand the reason why the system exists in the first place. The guiding star will serve as our navigational tool, just like an example of the Star of Bethlehem, where the three kings were following it, neither reaching there, but following it and guiding them. When we talk about the guiding star, we ask ourselves, what future system is your team passionate about working towards? And what is the system working towards? And that answer helps us understand the goal or the desire of the system. The next step is to be able to work out a near star. A near star is a goal that is referring to a desire that we would like to have, but not as far away as a guiding star. Near stars can be a 1 or 2 or 3 year goal that you want to be able to achieve as an outcome of what the system is supposed to be. It is something that you wish to attain at a closer period, and near stars are going to be acting as a guiding step rather than an end step. Take note that near stars are not necessarily fixed. They can be revised, they can change, they can adapt as you discover new things about your system. But the guiding star remains the same. In this step, we need to keep in mind how our system is behaving at that moment. We need to be able to visualize the behavior of our system. In here, we have to recall what symptom are we looking at, which is the result of the wicked problem that we are studying. We need to visualize the pattern of this symptom, and we need to also understand the consequence of this pattern over time. A good example would be looking at the behavior of COVID cases at the global level, and we ask ourselves what is influencing the oscillating pattern of cases. And that will help us understand whether the system we're trying to understand was able to capture the right drivers or influencers that could most probably explain the behavior that we are seeing now. The last part in clarifying your system is to understand how you can frame the system. Framing is a way to set some sort of a focus or boundary. This is not to limit how you might want to interpret the system, but rather to allow everybody in your team to focus more of making sure that we all understand what is the system all about. By developing a framing question, the team that you will bring together will help focus their understanding of the system and try to figure out ultimately what is the effect or symptom that we're trying to address. Throughout the journey of the team in applying systems thinking, we need to keep in mind that we need to help the team shift in the way we see and think about the system. We need to think about how can we make the system healthier. It is not about changing the system, but rather finding ways to unlock the change instead of forcing it. We need to find a way later on how the system can adapt to the changes. In order to bring together the focus of the team, we need to come up with a framing question. A framing question is a compelling question that will later on guide your team in your mapping exercise. It's a question that will help the team to focus its effort in understanding what drives the system. Some questions that can be used will be as follows. What are the forces that create or influence the situation that the system is having, or the condition or the behavior that the system is having? Why is the system the way it is? Why is the system acting the way it's acting? What factors are influencing the behavior of the system? Or what accounts for the current pattern of your system? These open-ended and somewhat generic questions, vague questions, is supposed to entice and engage your team to put in their views on what the system is made of. Some pitfalls you need to avoid when framing your question. Avoid framing questions that are biased on a solution. Keep in mind that sometimes when we frame our questions, they might be loaded with assumptions that are untested and contentious to the system. And finally, we want to make sure that when you frame your question, it is not on the perspective of what can we do now, or more biased on the act of intervention, rather than espousing the idea of clarifying or understanding what the system is all about. Part of clarifying your system is to be able to bring the right team together and build a shared view of your system. An important aspect of systems practice is the act of building what we call a shared view of the system. In order to build a shared view of your system, you need to be able to, again, focus on framing your system properly, asking the right questions to bring the perspectives and the thoughts of everybody into exploring and understanding what's happening to the system. It also goes into the aspect of collaborating and mapping your system, and then eventually discovering what we call deep structures or feedback loops, which will be your guide in identifying your leverage points. When you collaborate in mapping your system, keep in mind that it is a participatory approach. It relies on clarity of your question, and that you need to be ready to reframe the question in order to allow everybody in your team to gain a better understanding and focus of what they need to share. Typically, a team would be something like a 2 to 4 size. A good small size team is good. And then you can expand it as much as you want when you need more information. The key with the team is diversity, and even bring in some dissenting views, with the intention to hear and clarify different perspectives of the system. A significant part of systems practice is to be able to do workshops on systems building. We need to be able to bring people together and facilitate various ideas and be able to integrate them later on. Typically, we start with asking individuals to share their thoughts on what they think are the important factors or elements or influencers. This is where the framing question becomes critical, where each individual generates as much as they can in enumerating these critical factors. Then, the team can proceed to share and combine similar posts into themes in order to narrow down similarities so that it becomes more easy to understand. Once the team has narrowed down the ideas that each one of them have presented, we now allow the team to discuss, connect, and synthesize these themes or major factors, and see how these themes or factors are connected to each other. Synthesizing and connecting is actually the part where we now help or ask each individual to identify possible feedback loops. The idea here is to help them see how the variables are related to each other. One important aspect here is to help everybody focus on a key symptom variable. The symptom variable is the focus of the effect of your wicked problem. That will be the starting point of where you try to connect all other factors that you have in your list. Once the loops have been formalized and completed, we now draw the attention of the team and identify which among these loops are significant to the system variable. Which of these loops behave in a manner that influences the behavior of your variable. We ask the team to discuss and even iterate or change the words or the loops that might have come out. The goal here is to seek out inhibitors, which can be your negative feedback loop, or enablers, which are your positive feedback loops. And the goal is for the team to find out the deeper meaning of the structure. Once the team have identified the significant structure or loops, it is now time to identify possible leverage points in those loops. Are these points could be found in your inflows or outflows that drive your system variable? Could there be some information that can influence the way the people think about the variable and therefore affects the result of the variable? Could there be missing structures that can help improve the delay or impact the system variable by connecting the link or providing the information? Or there could be a way to influence the thinking of the people in the system so that the behavior towards the pattern is also changed. The team can begin to explore possible presence of leverage points within each of the feedback loops. For example, we have a feedback loop on people that are underbanked, and that one possible way of looking at them are those red boxes that indicate possible presence or opportunities for where leverage points can be found. Some final notes when you do group mapping. Make sure you gauge the receptiveness of your participants and your leaders. Make sure that they are comfortable and able to discover new insights that would feed to them participating more. Be open to bring other people along. Expect that there could be some turbulence in your discussions with other people because of diversity and different perspectives. Expect that you might have to do some change management along the way and not after. You want to make sure that you allow people to be able to adapt, embrace the possible change in the way they would see the system. Start with a small group, probably around 4, 5, and work on identifying the core structure of your system. And finally, plan to do this on a long-term play. You don't expect to gain insights in your first crack of your workshop. It's going to be a series of opening up of ideas, and changes can happen in the views of people along the way. Final messages for this lesson. Systems practice is about adopting the system's thinking principles and tools and applying them in a methodology. When we work with wicked problems of a system, it's important to spend time to clarify the current state and the goal of the system. And third, when we build a system map, it has to be built through a collaboration of people and to be able to visually see the mental model of how people understand and think about the system. We wanted different perspectives and diversity, and we relish the idea of discovering underlying leverage points for possible interventions later on.